Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another episode to my Shock to the Past series. Now this series consists of films from the 60s, 70s and 80s that shocked audiences back in the day and how they shape up by today's standards. So today we're going to be looking at probably the most controversial horror film ever made, from Italy in 1980, directed by Reggio Deodato, and this film is called Cannibal Holocaust. So Cannibal Holocaust is about four documentarians who venture into the rainforest to contact a lost tribe and document how they live. But unfortunately they've gone missing. So a group from New York have travelled to this rainforest in order to try and track them down, and what they discover is the ghastly remains of these four documentarians, and so it's obvious that they've suffered a horrible fate. So they want to get to the bottom of this, so they actually find cameras next to their remains, so they take them back to New York and they watch the footage, and this uncovers a terrifying truth that I'm not going to give away. So as I said, this is the most controversial film ever made, and I do believe it warrants its tag. Now this is a movie that does have a lot of relevance in today's society, but it's a movie that I thought reeked of desperation at the same time. That prevents it from being a flawless masterpiece, but I believe that Cannibal Holocaust is definitely a movie that's very important as far as horror is concerned, because this is horror done in a proper way. This is horror that invokes that feeling of terror, and this is something that is devoid of a lot of other horror films, is that they don't understand what it is to really creep under your skin and give you that sense of thought-provoking material. And so this movie does have a strong base as far as purpose is concerned, but as I said, there's an element to this movie that I thought was very unnecessary, and it reeked of a director that Reggio Deodato isn't. And so it's a very strange sort of feeling, that's something I'll go into a little bit later, but this movie, it does strike you with a lot of realism, and I cannot recommend this movie in good conscience to everybody. If you're a seasoned hardcore horror fan, I believe this is still going to shake you to the core, is because of how realistic the depictions of violence are. And this movie is so realistic that when it was released, the authorities actually believed that Reggio Deodato had people killed on screen, and so therefore he was actually charged with murder. And so the plan was to have the cast members hide after the release of the film to give the impression that it was real, but when that backfired on the director, he had to actually get the cast to come out of hiding to prove the fact that this was all fake. And so this is going to get a following, this is going to get attention, and I thought it was a masterstroke as far as selling the film. And so the notoriety around Cannibal Holocaust, I thought was a very smart idea, but it actually gave Reggio Deodato a lot of headaches, and so I can understand why. Is that this movie, along with another film called Guinea Pig, Flower of Flesh and Blood, Charlie Sheen thought that was a real snuff film, and so it does give you the indication that this is going to be a very realistic depiction. I think the realism is intensified through the way that Reggio Deodato actually made this film. He actually combined traditional storytelling with found footage horror, and I think the found footage horror in this movie was done very, very well, and it gives the authenticity that gives that creepy vibe. Is that I actually felt that I was watching something happen. I actually felt as though people were being killed in front of my eyes and I couldn't do anything about it. And that was down to the realistic depictions of gore and the overall matter-of-fact way that the movie was shot. And so even by today's standards, this is going to shock a lot of people. It's going to upset a lot of people. There's a lot of sexual violence, there's a lot of extreme gore, and it's very, very graphic. And I thought there were scenes that actually made me feel sick to my stomach. And so this is everything that a horror world should create, is it creates something that's going to make you feel very upset. When horror is done properly, you're not going to sit in your seat and saying to yourself, that looked really cool, I'm being very entertained. Strong horror and genuine horror is not supposed to entertain, it's supposed to terrify, and I think that Reggio Deodato actually creates that vibe and the atmosphere that you don't want to be a part of, but you know you're watching a genuine horror experience. And so the movie also has that strong purpose through the social commentary that it depicts. Is basically two worlds. You got the civilized Western world against the primitive world of these natives, and the power of ignorance, and ignorance shaping the devils that these documentarians ended up being. And so when they're treating these natives in such a horrible way, it begs the question, who are the real primitives? Who are the real savages? We've got today's Western society that will exploit the third world or the tribe world in order for a quick buck, and is that you disconnect yourself, you don't treat them as human beings. And so at the start of the film you've got these tribesmen who appear to be very scary, but once you get to know these tribesmen and you know what these documentarians are doing, it starts to evolve itself to a point where I didn't really feel as scared of the tribe members as I was at the start, and I actually started to feel scared of the Western civilized people. And so it's a very relevant social commentary on how we treat one another and the power of ignorance, and basically shaping a monster that might not necessarily exist in reality. And so I thought that was very strong, and that is what gives the movie a purpose, and it makes the shocking moments of this movie even more intense. And so when you've got a movie that's just there to shock for the sake of it, but no real content to back it up, it feels like a desperate attempt at just giving you something that is just going to shock you on a visual basis, and I think that's very unnecessary, and that's where a lot of extreme horror films really fail. But Reggio Deodato has probably created the best extreme horror film ever made because of the fact that it has that social relevance, and it does make you talk about it. And so this is the reason why it's so memorable, is that yes, it does burn in your retina as far as what you're seeing, but it also gives that thoughtful approach that makes you think, all right, well, this is a lot more mature than just a standard sort of immature film that's just splashing a lot of blood for the sake of it, because it doesn't really have anything behind it to really bank on. And so the core heart of Cannibal Holocaust I thought was very relevant in today's society, which makes it even scarier. So the overall acting I thought was decent, but it's the grittiness of the atmosphere created through the found footage segments from the movie that are by far the most terrifying. And this is, as I said, everything that horror should be. And on top of that, you've got an absolutely phenomenal soundtrack. Now go on YouTube, have a look at the sound, or listen to the soundtrack yourself, and you won't forget it. And I thought the soundtrack gives some of the scenes even more power, and so that's something I really like. But unfortunately, there is one glaring criticism of this movie that I thought really prevented it from being a flawless masterpiece, because this negative really felt out of place, and that negative was the real-life animal cruelty. Now, I'm not one of these crusaders who say you shouldn't eat animals, because I eat meat myself, and I know that tribesmen, you have to kill animals to eat them, and I can appreciate that, and I don't think anything wrong of that. But in this movie, the real-life animal killings, it reeked of desperation. It reeked of a director who didn't really knew what it took to shock an audience through a story and through, ghastly images. So he had to throw in real-life animal cruelty to get that notoriety. But it didn't need that. It actually shocks you with the story. It shocks you with the social relevance. It didn't need the real-life animal killings. It could have just been fake killings, or even just throw away the killings altogether, and it doesn't progress the film anymore. It just says, okay, well, these animals are being killed in real life, and I thought that was a complete waste. It wasn't needed. And so I thought, all right, well, that's just a glaring sort of a negative that you can't really overlook, is because it feels so out of place. It reeks of a director who's so desperate because he doesn't have the ability to get you through a story, but he does get you through the story. And so I thought, I didn't really understand why that was needed. And so I thought, all right, well, I boycotted this movie for the longest time because of this, but I finally thought, all right, if I'm going to do a Shock to the Past series, I have to have Cannibal Holocaust in there. And so I fast forward through those scenes, and in the end, what you get, if I push that away, I actually liked Cannibal Holocaust. I actually liked it a lot better than I anticipated, because I thought it was just going to be an extreme film for the sake of being extreme. So it's not a brilliant movie by today's standards. I still think it will shock you, but there are some moments that are very outdated. But I believe that it's very important as far as extreme horror is concerned, because this is how you make an extreme horror film. If you have content and relevance behind the shocking visuals that you have, it just gives those visuals even more intensity and even more horror. And so this is how genuine horror is supposed to be made, and for that I would recommend it. But be very careful, even for seasoned hardcore horror fans. If you are one of the very few people who haven't seen it already, be very careful, because there's a lot of content in there that will upset you, which is exactly what a horror film should do. Alright guys, that's it for this episode. Until next episode, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.